Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Invest in Brazil Infrastructure, United States edition, held by Apex Brazil in partnership with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Economy and Infrastructure, in addition to the National Bank for Economic and Social Development, Inter-American Development Bank, Investment Partnerships Program, Bradesco BBI, ABDIB, Climate Bonds Initiative, AmCham Brazil, Forum of CEOs Brazil, United States, and the U.S. government. I am Roberto Scotto, Head of Investment Department at Apex Brazil, and I'm going to be the presenter of this event. This is the Chapter 2 of a series of digital events on infrastructure that will be held this year. The next ones will be focused on other markets and sectors, specifically ports and sanitation. The goal of this second event is to present you the advances carried out in the infrastructure sector in Brazil, in addition to detailing the opportunities that are open to the U.S. investors. The entire event is going to be in English. To achieve this goal, in today's event, we'll have the participation of very important people, such as the Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Economy, Marcelo Guaranis, the Special Secretary of the Investment Partnerships Program, Marta Cellier, the BNDES Infrastructure Director, Fábio Abraão, the CEO of AmCham Brazil, Débora Vieitas, the President South America Strategic Business Unit of AES Corporation, Julian Nebreda, the Secretary for Infrastructure Development at the Ministry of Economy, Diogo McCord, among others. If you have any questions to our speakers, please send them to the email ibi@apexbrasil.com.br that is appearing now on the screen. After the final comments of each panel's moderator, 2 questions from the audience will be selected, and I will address them to the speakers. I'd like to invite, for the opening words, the President of Apex Brazil, Sergio Segovia.
Thank you, Scotto. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to welcome you to this working meeting. I thank you all in a warm Brazilian way. Muito obrigado. We will have today a profitable program. Brazil will present its multiple investment opportunities in the infrastructure sector. An innovative and ambitious agenda of regulatory reforms is being implemented by the Brazilian federal government. According to UNCTAD, the country is currently the 6th largest global foreign direct investment (FDI) destination. This is a direct consequence of the new business environment and the acceleration of privatizations and concessions. Despite the impacts of the pandemic and all its challenges, we remain optimistic. A little over a month ago, Brazil returned to the list of the 25 most reliable countries for FDI, as pointed out by US consultancy firm A.T. Kearney. Brazil has an enormous consumer market, abundant raw materials, plentiful energy resources, as well as a diverse economy. Above all, we are resilient and creative. We have a set of characteristics that allow the country to establish itself more and more as a strategic business partner for the United States. American investors already hold the largest stock of FDI in Brazil, equivalent to almost 20% of total FDI. Only in 2019, US companies accounted for 93 greenfield and 31 brownfield projects in Brazil. American companies are presently involved in 79 new infrastructure projects in Brazil, adding up to investments of $25 billion. Those projects are basically concentrated in electric power and utilities and transportation sectors. Given this whole scenario, nothing could be more natural than to consider the United States in a special way. We want to intensify these investment flows, offering a new Brazilian portfolio of opportunities in infrastructure. Our countries are writing today a new chapter in their relationship, and it is essential to strengthen the ties that favor joint growth. Apex Brazil is willing to offer a significant contribution to this new moment of the Brazil-US partnership, establishing itself as a reference in facilitating investments with wide experience and capacity to dialogue with public and private players. Linked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the agency operates in the one-stop-shop concept. We concentrate investors' demands and cover all steps related to facilitating foreign direct investments, including aftercare. In the first half of 2020, 19 foreign direct investment projects were facilitated by the agency, totaling $3.2 billion. Through events like this, we can be even closer to investors and offer ever greater clarity and transparency to guide your decision-making process. We work with 8 priority sectors, including infrastructure, which allow us to stay fully in line with the federal government regarding FDI attraction. The other 7 sectors prioritized by the agency are oil and gas, renewable energy, agribusiness, venture capital and private equity, health, automotive, and aerospace. Regarding the infrastructure sector, an important differential for Apex Brazil is the combined operation with the Investment Partnership Program, PPI, linked to the Ministry of Economy and holder of an investment portfolio that exceeds $240 billion in assets, with 131 ongoing projects. Brazil's portfolio is impressive, not only for its size, but also for the continuous flow of projects. Investing in infrastructure in Brazil means contributing to the development of sustainable projects and surpluses that will positively impact the country and its citizens. This goes from the improvement of mobility to the promotion of basic health, as well as water and waste management. There is an important window for US investors, and we will expect you to seize these opportunities. I would like to highlight that today's seminar is also a warm-up for the CEOs Forum promoted by Brazilian and American governments, as well as the second in a series of events especially designed by Apex Brazil for the infrastructure sector. More events are coming, all in preparation for the 4th edition of the Brazil Investment Forum, BIF, which will take place on 9 and 10 of November this year in the city of Sao Paulo. The forum is considered the main investment event in Latin America. It is the result of a partnership between Apex Brazil, the Ministry of Economy, and the Inter-American Development Bank. It will certainly gain more relevance this year as it provides updates on the business environment from a post-pandemic point of view. BIF will be a platform for the promotion of national strategic sectors with an emphasis on infrastructure, energy, agribusiness, technology, and innovation. Please feel kindly invited and get ready for the updates that will be presented. Due to the restrictions imposed by the pandemic, the 2020 BIF will be held in a hybrid format. A face-to-face forum and a virtual forum will take place simultaneously. As someone that had the privilege to live in the United States some time ago, I consider myself a staunch defender of our unique partnership and friendship. We share fundamental values such as democracy, economic freedom, and rule of law. It's time to be bold and do more. Throughout my professional career, I have been personally inspired by one of the great heroes of the US Civil War, Admiral David Farragut. Faced with adverse conditions during the Battle of Mobile Bay in 1864, Farragut set an example of boldness and courage. His command, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," has become my own personal motto. I hope you all join us in moving full speed ahead. Please don't hesitate to use Apex Brazil as your own personal compass. I wish you all the best, and thank you very much once again.
President Segovia, thank you for your great thoughts about the relationship between Brazil and the United States and on the role of CEOs Forum and the role of Apex Brazil in attracting foreign investments. Thank you very much. Now we are going to connect to the Special Secretary for Foreign Trade and International Affairs of the Ministry of Economy, Mr. Roberto Fendes, and Mr. Joseph Semsa, Deputy Undersecretary for International Trade, U.S. Department of Commerce, so that they can say their welcome words. Mr. Roberto, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the relevant audience composed of important American entrepreneurs for joining us today for this dedicated session. Good morning to all and our guests. I hope you all and your families are safe. In spite of all challenges faced this year due to the emergency of the pandemic 19. I am glad we were able to strengthen the cooperation between Brazil and the United States. In fact, we have been facing unique opportunities to enhance bilateral relations. At Mar-a-Lago on March the 7th, our presidents gave us a clear mandate to move forward on an ambitious trade and investment agenda. In the last few months, we have been working very hard and closely with our American counterparts in order to fulfill the mandate we were given by our leaders. At the highest level, we have discussed ways to materialize the plan to intensify the economic and trade partnership between our two countries as agreed at Mar-a-Lago. Our governments have agreed to accelerate our ongoing trade dialogue under the Brazil-US Commission on Economic and Trade Relations. I'm very pleased to know that these discussions have advanced substantially, especially regarding trade facilitation, digital trade, and good regulatory practices among our subjects. These talks are building the foundation for what could become a modern and ambitious bilateral trade agreement between our countries. A great progress has also been made under the U.S.-Brazil Commercial Dialogue. Part of the activities developed under the Commercial Dialogue have contributed significantly to the improvement of the Brazilian regulatory environment and the implementation of good regulatory practices, so enhancing the bilateral business environment. The Commercial Dialogue's plenary meeting took place virtually on May 14, 2020, led by Secretary Lucas Ferraz and Acting Undersecretary Joe Samsar. Also in March of this year, a Memorandum of Cooperation was signed by the Ministry of the Economy and the Department of the American Treasury to strengthen investments in infrastructure and cooperation between agencies in this subject. The main objective of the Memorandum of Cooperation is to facilitate technical assistance, the exchange of experiences, and the support for investments in infrastructure in a consistent manner, considering the environmental aspects of each country. The areas of cooperation are sustainability, innovation and technology transfer, regulatory structures and public procurement process, infrastructure investment. More specific actions will be established in an action plan to be prepared in the upcoming days by a working group with technicians from both sides. I would like to highlight the importance of the Brazil-United States CEO Forum as an instrument for deepening the relations between the two countries. We have done our homework since the November plenary held in Washington and have made a very good progress on those areas identified as priorities by the members of the CEO Forum. This progress is a result of the work done in coordination with a number of government agencies from both Brazil and the USA. I also stress the importance of our permanent contact with our CEOs. The CEO Forum gains significant importance as a mechanism that favors our bilateral trade and investment relations by raising issues that will foster the exchange of best practices and regulations, the removal of technical barriers to trade, the reduction of bureaucracy, and cut the red tape at the border, thus contributing significantly in address cross-cutting issues affecting the economic partnership between our countries and the competitiveness of Brazilian and American firms. Indeed, the Forum has encouraged both countries to work jointly to boost the development of successful infrastructure projects and increase bilateral cooperation. The seminar is one of the positive answers given by both governments to the recommendations received by CEO Forum last November. As my final consideration, I would like to emphasize once more that Brazil is committed to strengthening the bilateral economic partnership with the United States, with the objective of increasing bilateral trade and investment and promoting greater prosperity for both countries. There is still much to be done to respond to the opportunities and aspirations of our governments and the private sector in relation to trade and investment. But we are working seriously in this direction. Thank you all for engaging in this agenda, and I look forward to hearing from you. I wish you all participants a very productive event and fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Mr. Roberto Fan, thank you very much for your welcome words. And now, please, Mr. Joseph Sensa, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, and I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to this great event. On behalf of Secretary Ross and the U.S. government co-chairs of the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum, I also want to thank you and Apex Brazil for your partnership. The Department of Commerce has worked with Apex Brazil through the years on various issues via the Memorandum of Understanding between Apex Brazil and Select USA, which is the U.S. government program dedicated to promoting and facilitating business investment into the United States. Apex Brazil and Select USA last met in Washington in March and continue to exchange best practices and support each other in our respective investment activities. And I would be remiss if I did not also thank the valuable Brazilian and U.S. CEO members of the CEO Forum who worked so hard to develop comprehensive, concrete, and actionable recommendations to both of our governments last year on how to increase bilateral trade and investment. As we've all witnessed by now, we are at an historic point in our relationship where our two governments are aligned and our leadership is fully engaged. And I will tell you that Ambassador Chapman reminds me of that all the time. Facing a global health and economic crisis makes our jobs to increase bilateral trade and investment, identify opportunities for commercial partnership, and grow jobs even more important in this particular time. In March, as mentioned, our two presidents, President Trump and President Bolsonaro, met and they called upon the trade teams to deepen discussions towards a bilateral trade package. When the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum issued its first set of joint recommendations back in 2007, calling for our two governments to work towards a trade agreement, this notion seemed near impossible. But together we took that challenge and began to lay the groundwork to support the long-term goal of a trade agreement, one technical discussion at a time. And in my mind, through these many dialogues, we mentioned the commercial dialogue, we're essentially standing up a foundation to further grow the relationship. Over the years, we developed a robust set of tools to execute our agenda, and the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum sits at the pinnacle of those efforts. The CEO Forum develops recommendations that inform the priorities of other working groups, dialogues, and fora throughout our governments, including the U.S.-Brazil Commercial Dialogue and the U.S.-Brazil Energy Forum. So I look forward to hearing how today's discussions about the CEO Forum's infrastructure recommendations go. The Commerce team stands ready to work with the White House and the U.S. Interagency to address outcomes from today's events. I encourage you to take this opportunity to be as specific, realistic, and solution-oriented as you can, and then let us know how we can be helpful. We look forward to the 11th meeting of the CEO Forum next month, and we thank you very much for your time today. I would end by just very quickly saying I wish all of you good health during this time. Thank you.
Mr. Joseph Sensa, thank you for your good words. We could, hearing both of you, we believe that the relationship between the two countries will be improved because our both governments are committed to this. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Dow, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here this morning. I'm sorry, Mr. Forgive me. It's Dow Wilson? Forgive me.
Mr. Dow Wilson. Please, Mr. Dow Wilson, your microphone is muted. We had some issues.
Here we go. Is that working now? Sorry about that. Thank you all for having me at Invest in Brazil Infrastructure today. The Brazil-U.S. relationship is taking important steps in the right direction, and we're very excited about the progress being made for better trade environments with the Brazilian government. I'm honored to serve with Marco Stefanini as co-chair of the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum, which is comprised of private and public sector representatives, to provide joint recommendations for the U.S. and Brazilian governments on priorities to expand and grow the bilateral relationship. This is a historic time in the bilateral relationship between our two countries. President Trump and President Bolsonaro have committed to opening up the trade relationship between the two countries, and both governments are committed to making significant reforms to have a better business climate for both U.S. and Brazilian private sectors. The forum stands in a unique position that no other CEO forum has previously experienced to advance our recommendations and follow through with our respective governments to act. These recommendations address trade relations, tax, infrastructure, technology, communications, space and education, and workforce and healthcare. The private sector is hoping that these recommendations serve as the framework for real action on a trade deal between the two countries, which includes significant procurement reform around infrastructure, which is the subject of this event, of course. We're excited to hear about the government strategy for maintaining infrastructure projects in 2020 and how we can further support this mission. Thank you for including us in this important meeting. Thank you very much, and wishing you all the best as well.
We thank you for your participation, Mr. Dow Wilson. Now I invite the CEO of Stefanini IT Solutions, Marco Stefanini, to talk about the role of the CEO Forum Brazil, United States.
Okay, good morning. Are you listening me? Yes? Okay. Good morning. Thanks, Dow Wilson. Many thanks to all of you to listen us today in this event. I want to say only a few words why investing now in energy, logistics, and other areas in Brazil. The world is facing a huge liquidity and full clean energies projects opportunities for investors. This is what we are planning to show you today. Brazil has a lack of infrastructure projects, especially in logistics, where the high fight goes to construction, road extensions, railroads, ports, and airports. A country with a liberal financial team for the first time in 30 years. Good, again, a strong opportunity for its investors. And finance internet, here a half full glass. Now it is the right time to invest in Brazil, including favorable currencies. Thank you for coming and enjoy our events.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanini. And now, proceeding in our event, I'd like to invite Ms. Deborah Vieitas, CEO of Ancham Brazil, for talking about the Ancham and the Brazil-US partnership on the goals for 2020. Ms. Deborah, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Scotto. Good morning on behalf of Ancham Brazil and our more than 5,000 company members, which together account for approximately 1/3 of the Brazilian GDP. And I would like to thank you, Apex Brazil, for organizing such a timely event. I would like to greet everyone participating in this meeting, and I do this in the person of Mr. Sergio Segovia, President of Apex Brazil, together with all partners of this relevant initiative. I also mentioned Mr. Roberto Fent, our Special Secretary for Foreign Trade and International Affairs, and Mr. Joseph Samsar, U.S. Deputy Under Secretary for International Trade. It's a pleasure to join you for discussion today, and the subject being many opportunities for investing in Brazil, more particularly in the infrastructure sector. My role this morning is to highlight the ongoing efforts for enhancing Brazilian-U.S. trade and economic partnership and what could still be achieved in 2020. And I might say that my task has been greatly facilitated by the last speakers when Mr. Dow Wilson and Marco Stefanini presented the work done by the CEO Forum in supporting the bilateral relationship. As a business representative, we from Ancham Brazil have been also working to help translating the synergy and goodwill that exists between the US and Brazilian administrations into pragmatic and ambitious results. We all know that our countries are important trade and investment partners. Our bilateral trade flow of goods and services exceeds $100 billion a year, and the stock of mutual direct investment in the two countries surpasses $110 billion. Nonetheless, we are certain that there is much more to be accomplished, considering that we are the two largest economies in the Americas, and that together we account for more than 25% of the world's GDP. In this sense, there are several measures within our grasp that could help to unlock substantial economic benefits from both of our countries. That is why we from Ancham Brazil have been vocal in asking both governments to focus on results that can still be delivered this year. To begin with, we urge them to conclude the ongoing negotiations for a bilateral trade package, already mentioned by Secretaries Fent and Samsar, because it covers issues such as trade facilitation and good regulatory practices that have the potential to improve the business environment for companies operating in both countries, as well as to enhance trade and investments between the two countries. Considering that traveling is key for strengthening investment ties, it is important to resume, as soon as possible, the flow of travelers between our countries, which was interrupted due to the health crisis caused by the pandemic. In the same sense, we support the participation of Brazil in the Global Entry Program, which would allow expedite entrance in the US for Brazilian citizens. Talking about investments, I go back to the theme of this event. There is an avenue of opportunities to explore in the infrastructure sector in Brazil, in areas already mentioned by Marco Stefanini, and also including roads, railway, airports, ports, oil and gas, among others. As you will hear the whole morning today, Brazil is modernizing its regulatory framework, making it friendly to invest here, offering strong institutional support for foreign investors, and opening new areas for the private sector to get in. As a joint effort from our governments, we hope to see more technical cooperation in areas that are critical for investments. For example, the need to standardize infrastructure RFP so as to facilitate the participation of American companies. We can also expect interaction between funding agencies and the business sector. On my side, I may mention that I have been noticing growing activity from many government actors in the past couple of years and months, such as U.S. Exim Bank, the U.S. TDA, and U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and as well Apex Brazil, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the PPI program, and BNDES. Likewise, I have been seeing increasing interest from investors in both sides of the hemisphere. Just to give you an example, AmCham is holding with great success a series of virtual meetings on infrastructure as a preparation to an investment mission to the US we are organizing for next year, hopefully when the situation will be better. I'm sure the following 2 hours we will hear many valuable insights about the perspective on infrastructure in Brazil, as well as the projects available in the country. Brazil is looking forward to attracting investors, and the US is the most natural partner for this joint enterprise. We have many US companies with deep roots and a track record of success in Brazil. Our countries and companies share common values and have a solid tradition of doing business together. AmCham Brazil is the living evidence of that synergy. We are the largest American Chamber of Commerce among almost 117 chambers outside the US, and we have been supporting the bilateral relationship for more than 100 years. We are convinced that the infrastructure sector is crucial for the recovery of the Brazilian economy, also is an important pillar for strengthening the Brazil-US bilateral relationship. But more than that, it presents real good business opportunities for American investors. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have an insightful event. Good day.
AmCham has excellent perspectives for 2020, Ms. Deborah. Thank you very much. Before starting the first panel, I'd like to remind that if you have questions to the speakers, please send us an email to ibi@apexbrazil.com.br that is appearing on your screen once again. To start the first panel, which will address infrastructure perspectives in economic development, I'd like to invite our panelists. They are the Secretary for Infrastructure Development at the Ministry of Economy, Diogo McCord, the Director of Development at the Secretariat of Development, Planning and Partnerships of the Ministry of Infrastructure, Rafael Furtado, and the Head of Latin America of the Climate Bonds Initiative, Tatiane Gasparotto. I also have the pleasure of inviting our moderator, Mr. Morgan Doyle, IDB representative in Brazil. Mr. Morgan, the panel is all yours.
Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Mr. Segovia, Mr. Scotto, and the speakers who spoke before me, the Undersecretary, for this great opportunity to moderate the perspectives of infrastructure for economic development in Brazil. We're very proud at the Inter-American Development Bank to be a partner of APEX in this sort of event, but in particular in the Brazil Investment Forum, which was mentioned previously. It's a real honor to have such a credible group on this panel, Diego, Rafael, and Tatiane. At the IDB, we believe firmly that infrastructure is critical to foster economic and social development that Brazil needs now more than ever. In fact, we just recently put out our flagship report this year that deals with infrastructure. And in order to provide 2 or 3 data points to start the discussion, I'd like to mention that that report shows that the small increases in service efficiency, including digitalization, innovation, sustainability, can boost growth by 5.7% over the next 10 years in Latin America and Caribbean. That represents over $300 billion in additional income. But to achieve that, Brazil and other countries in Latin America need to tackle issues such as poor efficiency, better quality of projects, accessibility, and sustainability of its infrastructure. And that's only going to be done by changing the focus. We need to think about infrastructure as services rather than just as buildings. And the challenges are huge, as we know. Over 16% of Brazilian households don't have water yet. There's $500 billion in investments needed to grow electricity production and distribution to meet domestic demands over the coming years. And clearly, in the era of tightened budget, governments alone will not be able to perform all of these investments. But what we can do in an event such as these is attract private money, especially from the US in this case, that Brazil needs and is very ready to deploy to develop infrastructure. There's a huge opportunity here for US companies, and we think that this is a very timely event in order to work for that. There's been a major push on the part of Brazilian government to increase to make the business environment more friendly, to allow such improvements to happen, including the recent sanitation legal framework, reforms that are ongoing and under discussion with reforms with regards to gas, among many others. So it's truly a fabulous opportunity to participate in public-private partnerships and concessions here in Brazil, to transform projects into programs, to help standardize clear and predictable reporting processes, and to really help improve the availability of infrastructure here. I don't want to speak too much, but I want to hand over with that initial discussion about the opportunities for infrastructure here, and to reiterate that the IDB is an important player in Brazil. We have over $5 billion in infrastructure. We're partnered with the members of the panel today, with Diogo, with Rafael, and with Tatiana, and different initiatives to structure PPPs and concessions to help promote green and sustainable bond market here in Brazil as an alternative funding, to develop a sustainable infrastructure observatory, which will be critical in pushing forward the very ambitious goals that the government has. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Diego Macord, Secretary for Infrastructure at the Ministry of the Economy, to whom I'd like to address the following question. Last year, Brazil approved a law called PLC 79, the so-called New Generations Telecommunications Law, which we know is really a really critical watershed in the development of that sector here. Could you please explain a little bit about the changes that were involved in that law, and specifically, what are the opportunities for foreign investors, in particular U.S. investors, in that regard? Thank you very much.
Sure, Morgan. So good morning to you, to all my colleagues here. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you, Apex, for organizing this great event, and thank you very much for the invitation. So going to your question, Morgan, that's a great question, because we do believe that it was a great achievement. So this new legal framework of the telecom sector, as you said, it is commonly known as PLC 79, but it was moved to Law 13879. So it changes the market design of the sector by ending the build, operate, and transfer scheme that we currently have in Brazil. And so from now on, the telecom companies will be able to invest freely, with no need to reverse the investments to the government at the end of the contract term. So it is particularly important for the current operators, as they can keep their current assets, yet they will have to pay a grant to the federal government in order to have the right to keep the assets. And this new bill also allows the automatic renovation of the frequency, which is very important to bring stability and security to the operators to invest. For those who don't know the Brazilian telecom market, we have 4 main players, which are TIM, Vivo, Claro, and Oi. This last one, Oi, as some of you might know, has required something close to Chapter 11 to the Brazilian court, but they are still operating. And we have the 5G bidding scheduled to the first semester of 2021. So it should be a great opportunity to new players to come to Brazil. And we are right now working to reduce or even eliminating the fees that are currently charged the smart devices. The idea here is to exonerate the IoT and the Industry 4.0, which we know are very important to boost the 5G market. So in a nutshell, that's the most important change that we have from PLC 79, but it is embedded with other regulatory and legal changes that we are currently organizing here in Brazil to boost telecom and IoT and Industry 4.0.
Thank you very much, Diego. That's really interesting. So it's really a good time to be aware of what's happening in telecom, because there's numerous opportunities that are coming on the horizon and that will demand significant investments. I'd like to follow up with a second question, something I know you've been very, very involved in, and it's from our perspective, it's a really critical change, which is the new legal framework for basic sanitation. This is a very big news indeed, and it represents a huge step towards universalization of services, which are now, in the case of the pandemic, COVID-19, even more essential. Can you speak a little bit about the expected results from that?
Sure. So that's I would say my favorite change that we have promoted in the past months. That's a great achievement that we have. Currently, 94% of the Brazilian cities are covered by state-owned companies, and amazingly, these companies left behind 35 million people who cannot count on treated water in their taps, and 100 million people who cannot count on sewage collection. So that's a huge gap, right? Every day we dump 6,000 Olympic pools of raw sewage in the nature, Morgan. So every day, that's a huge problem, an environmental problem that we have in Brazil. And to finally end this, what we call this national shame, this new bill brings 3 waves of investment. So the first one is right now, we are observing many opportunities that are coming on. So for instance, in Rio de Janeiro, which requires investments around $5 or $6 billion, right? So that's huge. We also have other medium-sized investments, such as Alagoas, which requires $500 million. But I will not go deeper on that, because I understand that people who are now listening to us will have the opportunity to meet Fabio Abrão. He's the director of BNDES, who is in charge of these opportunities, so he knows it much better than me. The second wave of investment will happen probably around 2022, because this new legal framework says that all state-owned companies should set up investment goals to make the service universal by 2033. And then they will have to prove that they have either equity to invest directly or access to debt. And if they are not able to prove that they have access to money, right, to finance, they will lose their contract, and then we have to set a bidding process. And finally, the third wave will happen probably around 2027, when we'll verify whether the goals set in 2022 were met. So if they are not, the operators will lose their contracts, and so new tenders will have to be prepared. So we are talking about something around $120 billion on investment by 2033. That's huge, but I believe that that's the most important opportunity that we have that involves directly the ESGs, right? Because we are talking about a social problem and an environmental problem. So all the great things that we have to achieve in infrastructure investments, we can see in the water and sanitation sectors.
It's a fantastic opportunity for engineering companies, for construction companies, that to set up a beachhead and to begin to get active, because there's a huge pipeline coming. So it's a great opportunity. I'd like to ask us a little bit of a different question now, Diego. If you could maybe describe, I know from where you sit in the Ministry of the Economy, you're constantly thinking about infrastructure and how to promote private investment. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how, from your view and from the ministry's view, you face the challenge of allowing flexibility in long-term contracts, but at the same time ensuring the necessary predictability for investors.
Sure, that's a great question. So It is important to say, Morgan, that Brazil does have a very large experience on PPPs, right? So since 1995, we have done many tenders and biddings about PPPs on infrastructure. So as we know, the PPPs, as we use in Brazil with the build, operate, and transfer, I just said that some sectors are changing it, right? But it is the mainstream. This BOT usually have a long-term contract. So we're talking about maybe from 20 to 35 years, something around it. So, for instance, the telecom sector, which was completely privatized in the 90s, currently invests something around $6 billion every year, and the power sector something around $8 billion. So we do have this experience, and we learned a lot in the past 25 years. Considering these long-term contracts that we have to sign with the investors, and I do understand that some U.S. investors might fear long-term investments in Brazil. But it is very important to say that we do have a very strong legal system here in Brazil, right? So we have never nationalized a private company, it is not in our DNA, right? And hence we do respect private investors. So that said, the most important tool that we have to think about is the contract term. So yet many things might happen throughout this 30 or 35 years of duration. We can predict in advance what could go wrong, right? So mainly what we have learned from our experience in this 25 years is that we are able to include within the contract maybe a risk matrix which is able to say what will we do in order to respond to some risk materialization, right? So it means that if a risk matrix is embedded within the contract, specifying which risks materialization enables a rebalance of the contract, and if the methodology that says how it will be done is also described in the contract, we are able to guarantee that everything that the investor calculated when he did this first valuation will be preserved, right? So we are able to keep the NPV accordingly to a very detailed risk matrix embedded within the contract. So that's the way we are trying to think here in order to address all the problems that we saw in the past years. We do believe that the new contracts of water and sanitation will come with this new design, and I believe it is a very positive revolution for the coming investments.
Absolutely, it provides a great deal of predictability, which in the end is critical. So thank you for clarifying that. I'd like to ask one more question. We have just a couple more minutes, but Diogo, if you could clarify how the Ministry of the Economy has approached political risks in foreign investment, if there's a specific methodology that you've employed in terms of how the ministries address that.
Yeah, so I do believe that the respecting contracts is the best way to address political risk, right? So once the investor have this very powerful instrument, which is a signed contract, we do believe that they will be able to recover everything that they were predicting. So we are improving the governance of our bidding process also, right? By fostering competition. We understand that the cartels that had in Brazil in the past years were terrible. So we are fostering competition. We are translating the tender documents to English. We are making all documents available 100 days in advance of the tender. And again, we do respect contracts. So we are targeting, Morgan, $1.8 trillion of investments in infrastructure within the next 20 years. That's a lot, right? So $1.8 trillion in the coming 20 years. And we will need roughly 1/3 of this money coming from international savings, because we don't have national savings enough to cover all these investments. So we understand that legal and regulatory stability are key to attract these investments. And then our secretariat here is very much dedicated to make sure that all U.S. investors, and of course all global investors, will feel safe enough to invest here with us.
Thank you very much, Diogo. Yeah, absolutely. I am fortunate enough to be a partner of yours and of your unit, and I can absolutely testify to the fact that there's a great deal of work and a great deal of effort put into ensuring that there's a predictable and stable and welcoming framework. So it's a great pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for that clarification. I will now turn over to Mr. Rafael Furtado, who's the Director of Development for the Secretariat of Development at the Ministry of Infrastructure. I'm very pleased to have you with us, Rafael. Thank you very much for accepting. Very important to have a view from where you are there in the Secretariat of Development, Planning and Partnerships as to what are the main concession projects under development by the Ministry of Infrastructure. If you could please speak to that issue, I think that's an incredibly important one for the listeners today.
Thank you, Morgan. It's a pleasure to take part of this event. I'm going to bring you a presentation, if possible, to show some of our projects.
Sure. Okay, it's loading now.
Well, are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's important to say that the Ministry of Infrastructure is responsible to take in the projects related to airports, ports, and highways and railways. I'm not going to bring you all the projects here. It's available with the PPI website and also the ministry, and we are always open to answer all the questions related to this subject. Well, we have a portfolio of projects in airports, so you can see that there are concessions that we want to bring. And we say that it's the 6th and the 7th round of concessions in Brazil. And all the concessions, you see that it's all around the country. And we are also very much interested in selling the participation of Infraero, which is a federal state-owned company that has a participation in a few airports. I can show you later on. It's important to say that in Brazil, we have main 6 stages of a procurement process. The first one is the studies. Then we have the public hearing held by the federal agencies, independent agencies. Then there's analysis by the Federal Court of Accounts that we call TCU. With the approval of TCU, we publicize the bidding documents. Then we have the auction and the signature of the contracts. So in this case, the 6th round has the next step with the TCU. And right after we have the approval of the TCU, we would publicize the bidding documents for the investors to analyze. We also have some concessions that are being studied. An example is the airport of Viracopos and also the airport of São Gonçalo do Amarante. And the 7th round, which is probably the last round of concessions that we have of the main airports in Brazil, is going to start to be studied in a brief moment. It's important. I would like to emphasize here the disposal of Infraero shares. So we want to sell the participation of Infraero. It's a project made by the federal company, but it's also a decision made by the ministry. And we also we are studying this competition and seeing the best moment to do it. In the port sector, well, we have, sorry, I'm gonna go back here. Well, we have projects of ports along all the coast of Brazil. We can say that there are 21 terminals to lease in Brazil and 4 concessions of ports. And I also need to say that it's our legal framework admits also the participation of the private sector by authorization, and they could get this authorization with the public sector to construct private terminals. So there's also this opportunity to invest in Brazil in ports. There are many terminals. I'm not going to go one by one, but I would like to remark the opportunities in different projects as terminals dedicated to grains, dedicated to oil and gas, like this one here, and in Santos, or dedicated to grains, this one here in Fortaleza in the northeastern part of Brazil. And there's also this one that's dedicated to sea salt, to mineral bulk, and the northeastern part of Brazil also. But we are very interested in this privatization of the federal companies and the organized ports. That's the concession of the whole port. And the first one, which is already being studied, is the concession of the port of Vitória, the concession of the Codesa. But right after the concession of Codesa, we will see the main port of Latin America being also studied. That's the port of Santos. And with the port of Santos, we will study also the port of São Sebastião. All those studies are being conducted by the BNDES. And then we have another port, the fourth port we were thinking about project privatization. That's the port of Itajaí in the southern part of Brazil. Well, about the highways, there are many projects like the others we saw with projects in ports. There are projects along the whole country. I'd like to highlight some of them. One of them we have just completed. That's the concession of the highway number 101 in southern part of Brazil. That was very recent. It was like a month ago we signed the contract. And the next contracts we won assigned, but we didn't the auctions yet, is the highway 153 and also the highway 163. And they're very important highways. This one's 163. It's alongside the railway we call Ferrogrão. That's a greenfield project. So this concession doesn't have a long term. It's only 10 years, right? Because we are thinking about the concession of the railway right after this one. And this one is a very important to a point. That's the highway between Sao Paulo and Rio. That's the most important highway that we have in Brazil. So it's very important to see investors looking at this project. About railways, I'd like to remark some of them. We have this investment is a brownfield project called FIOL, and there's a greenfield project called Ferrogrão. They're very important projects in Brazil. And also we are working on the extension of contracts of some companies that we have in Brazil, and they will bring a lot of the need to investments and partnerships to have those investments done. The FIOL, it's an important railway that we are constructing, and we're going to have the auction probably next year. It will connect the production of ore, iron, and to the Port of Ilhéus in Bahia. And also here is the Greenfield project. There's a very important project alongside the railway and the highway. that will connect the production of grains to the inland waterways. So it's used most to export grains to the world. And this is the renewal of the Carajás Railway and also the Vitória Minas Railway that will admit the construction by Vale of another railway called FICO. Will connect this railway will connect to the North and South Railway, and it's very important to the production also. Well, this is it's very important to highlight the large number of feasible projects. And also that the country is committed to open and fair competition. I'd like also to remark that we are growing, we have a market in improving the market of debentures, and also the foreign exchange risk can be addressed through PPP concessions contracts or hedged through the market. We are taking some measures that way. There's a bill called 2646 that we are studying and supporting in the Congress that will reduce to zero the withhold tax. And also there's bill number 2889 that will create the natural hedge that will allow the concessionaires to make contracts in US dollars or other currencies. That is also important. And finally, we have this bill, this 2646 also, that will increase from 24 to 60 months the reimbursed period from infrastructure debentures. Thank you, Morgan.
No, thank you, Rafael. That gives a really good sense of the scope of the projects that are available for foreign investment. It's really remarkable. It's and a very nice complement to the presentation by Diogo. You can really get a sense for particularly how large it is. I'd like to ask. Of what's coming and what the opportunities are, I should say. I'd like to ask a specific question in line with how the Brazilian government has been dealing with the sudden and precipitous decrease in demand that has been suffered by some concession contracts during the pandemic. It's a global phenomenon that's happened in concessions around the world, but how has that been dealt with here in Brazil? If you could speak to that, please.
Sure, that's a great question. We are concerned, as everyone, with the effects of the pandemic. And we understand that related to the contracts that we have, there's a case of force majeure. So we brought recently a legal opinion from the General Attorney's Office at the Ministry that can admit that we can rebalance the contracts depending on the effect on each contract. That's the main thing that we are facing in the contracts that we have at this moment.
Super. Maybe I ask a little bit also about the specific schedule. You laid out a very ambitious and broad a large number of ports and airports and basic transportation infrastructure across this enormous country. Can you speak a little bit about the schedule? Is the pandemic having an impact? And particularly, there's one that's very large, and I know it's very important for potential U.S. investors, which is the Santos port. If you can speak about that a little bit.
Of course. Well, there's no question that we had an effect on demand, mostly in the airport sector. So the studies that we had already completed, we needed to review them. So affected in some way our schedule. It was necessary to review the studies and also the specific demand. And on the other hand, we did not change the idea to keep was said before, to keep going forward on the project. So in this case, the forecast was revised for publication of 44 bidding documents, and no longer the auction will be held in 2020 due to impact to the demand, but we are going to do it in the auction in 2021.
Great. So maybe just one follow-on question, very briefly. Where can potential investors go to get this information? There's a huge amount of detail there. Is it in the PPI? Where precisely? Because I think it'll be very useful to guide them.
Of course. Well, we can also have contact with Apex. The Apex is organizing the talk between the Ministry of Infrastructure, PPI, and foreign investors, so they can talk to Apex first, and also we have the opportunity to make an agenda with one-on-one discussions, but also the PPI and directly the Ministry of Infrastructure we are also available to have these meetings.
Great, thank you so much. Of course, Apex is the port of entry, so to speak. So yeah, we encourage everyone who's listening to use them. They're very well prepared to address any questions. So now I will turn to Tatiana Gasparotto, the head of Latin America for the Climate Bonds Initiative, and who's been a great partner on green and sustainable bonds for Brazil and with the IDB. And ask you if you could please speak a little bit about the work that CBI has been developing here in Brazil.
Absolutely. Thanks, Morgan. And well, I'd just like to start off by thanking Apex for the invitation and obviously all the other partners that are co-hosting this event. It's great to be amongst our three main partners on infrastructure here. We've been developing a lot of work around subnational infrastructure, specifically with SDI, with Diogo Macor's team, and also the IDB. So looking specifically at water and sanitation, urban mobility, waste, and a lot of the PPP and concession frameworks for those asset classes. Additionally, we've also signed last year an MOU with the Ministry of Infrastructure, looking at the wider concession portfolio at the federal level, and very exciting to see the plans, especially around rail, which is the first kind of category we're tackling, particularly because of the potential for a green portfolio within that. So I think just talking a little bit about what we've been doing, what we've seen in the market. Brazil has just immense potential from a sustainable finance perspective. We've seen, this is a market that we've seen the doubling almost year on year since it started. And we closed 2019 with close to $270 billion in issuance globally. Brazil now stands at about 6.5 billion. Dollars in issuance. It's the second largest market. We were taken over by Chile with their sovereign issuances. But actually, if you look at the Brazilian context, it's actually a much more diversified market because we've had so many sectors and so many diversified types of issuers, a lot of corporate issuance. So I think one of the things that is particularly relevant in this context is we have seen a wave in investor demand for labeled products and for green products globally, right? Traditionally, this began a lot with institutional investors coming out of Europe, and now it's literally taken over across the globe and obviously North America. Becoming very strong in that demand as well. So I think the opportunity here that we've been seeing has really been, and when we talk about infrastructure, is really around building resilient portfolios. I think resilience now has become the kind of the golden word, especially in the context of the pandemic, and we can see the impacts that this has had on our economies. So I think as we talk about very long-term infrastructure planning, building resilient infrastructure projects and infrastructure portfolios is now as important as it's ever been.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and I'm glad to agree with you here in this forum about the potential for this market here in Brazil. We see that as incredibly promising. I mean, it already is the largest in Latin America, but overall, and maybe you could speak to this. What does it represent in terms of global? Has and the potential to grow over time. If you could speak briefly about that, and then I'd like to ask you a little bit about the question that you raised, which is a very interesting one, which is branding, not branding, rather rigorousness in labeling, and how you see that as if that's indeed an issue, and what you think should happen going forward.
Absolutely. So I think, taking the first point you mentioned, I mean, obviously we are very happy to see, where Brazil has come. This is, although the market overall is coming now close to close to 10 years. First issuances started a little bit earlier than that, but it's still a very recent market, right? It's still a very recent market for Brazil. I mean, we had the very first issuance out of 2015, and since then we've had a number of challenges around capital markets in Brazil overall in that particular period. So we are very, very proud of where Brazil has gotten to, but there's absolutely no question that Brazil hasn't even, touched the tip of the iceberg of what it can become. And when you look at, how that fits into the global space, there's certainly more room to grow. I think where Brazil stands out is Brazil has just such a substantive pipeline, which is from an emerging market, and we see a lot of demand for EM debt, and Brazil brings scale, provided the right criteria is met and the right asset classes are met. And I think that's where Brazil stands out. So one of the key sectors that we've actually always identified as the biggest potential for Brazil, and I know it's not directly connected to our discussion here, but it's agriculture. And actually, that's also the huge rationale for us to build even more resilient infrastructure systems and decarbonize our logistics matrix, for example, so we can carry that agri production. So Brazil brings scale, and what we see is that there is a huge potential to transition and to actually get to those right asset classes in right from where I'm standing. So I think in terms of criteria and the rigor, I think the big carrot, let's say, for this market is precisely around transparency, right? So labeled bonds, green bonds in particular, offer an added level of transparency and disclosure that other bonds don't. So investors are reassured of exactly where the proceeds are going to, and they also know what. So let's take a certified bond, for example, what that entails, what that kind of due diligence entails around, especially management of the proceeds. So I think that's important on two accounts. One is obviously transparency and disclosure is fundamental, especially in these asset classes that we're talking about. And secondly, this is about de-risking portfolios in the long term, right? So you want to make sure, and this is actually a crucial part to the work that we're doing with the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is around integrating climate risk into infrastructure planning, right? So, so in the sense that as these concessions are being rolled out, you're looking at 60, 80 years down the line. You want to make sure that at least an initial kind of risk assessment was done from a kind of a physical risk standpoint. So these assets will actually continue performing as much as they need to. So I think those are the two pillars of going into that green bond space.
And it'd be interesting to talk a little about perhaps if you could mention the work that you are doing and with our collaboration, but on precisely that, on merging and coming up with a unified criteria here in Brazil as a critical step forward. if you could speak to that.
Sure. So actually, it's interesting the way that's developed. So we what started all this work on subnational infrastructure and obviously the work that we're doing together was looking a bit at what's been happening in other markets. So if we look at, for instance, the U.S. Muni bond market, well, if we look at the U.S. green bond market, it's essentially a muni bond market, right? So it's a really interesting example where you have a slightly similar, let's say, federative structure where you have the states and municipalities, and what you've got in the U.S. is essentially these munis using the green finance market, using the green bond space to finance their infrastructure needs locally. And that is a huge need all across Latin America, obviously. Brazil not being different in that regard. And even though we have quite a few differences in the sense that we can't exactly replicate what we see in the U.S. market in terms of just issuing debt and the challenges that we have here from kind of a state and municipality standpoint, we do have a very similar pipeline. And that is known in the market, and that's understood in the market. And I think that's what's really fascinating about infrastructure, because that's already, from a private investor perspective, that's already a relatively well understood asset class. In comparison to others where we still need to do, a lot of early stage let's see, market education in a way. So for infrastructure that's there. And so what we've been doing together with SDI at the Ministry of Economy and IDB is, first of all, mapping what the opportunity was and looking at where that opportunity is. So we've mapped a pipeline, and for those of you interested, I know that's available on both IDB's website. It's also available on our website, and I'm sure it's somewhere in the government web pages as well. We've mapped, so what is the green pipeline for subnational infrastructure? Together with that, we've also looked at, so what are the structures that we can use? So provided we can't have an exact replica of what we see in the U.S. market or in other markets, such as Mexico, for example, what are we able to do from a Brazilian context? And that's where the PPPs and concession structures really do stand out as an interesting alternative. We are now currently looking at pooled financing, which has been a really successful example, just a really successful structure globally, and what can we do there. So that work is not 100% ready yet, but it will be very soon, and we look forward to sharing that with everyone.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think well, I'd like to try to weave these different strands together now, if you'll allow me. I think so. Diogo sort of laid out the trillions of U.S. dollars in coming investments in the coming years, which is just a remarkable pipeline, as Tatiana just mentioned as well. And Rafael laid out an actual pipeline with numbers and with specific projects that are underway, many of which are going to require significant investment from abroad. And as Tatiana just explained, there's the buzzword of the future is resilience. And indeed, her work at the CBI with the government and with Diego's team and with the Ministry of Infrastructure is very much focused on that long-term resilience. But clearly, there's a huge opportunity here in Brazil that the speakers have quite eloquently described. And I just wanted to reiterate that this is a welcoming and really opportune time to come and to explore, because the time going forward, rather the opportunities going forward are very, very substantial. And from our part at the Inter-American Development Bank, we stand ready to finance specific initiatives, specific projects, but be they concessions or public-private partnerships in conjunction with our Brazilian partners. We are very much engaged and willing and excited by that prospect. And with that, I would like to very much thank the distinguished speakers on this panel. It's been a really pleasure for me to participate with you and to have this role as moderator. And I would remind everyone that we will now turn to a question and answer session that will be moderated by Mr. Roberto Escoto. And with that, I bid you all farewell. Thank you very much.
We had 2 questions. The first one is to Diogo McCord. The question is, this infrastructure privatization and investment plan comes on the heels of a severe crisis and years of huge infrastructure promises that were not fulfilled. What makes this time different?
So I'm sorry, Roberto, we couldn't listen you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Are you hearing now?
Yes.
This infrastructure privatization and investment plan comes on the heels of a severe recession and years of huge infrastructure promises that were not fulfilled. What makes this time different?
Well, if I may start, I think that we did a lot in the past. But the problem is that the solutions were maybe concentrated in some specific sectors. So, for instance, the power sector, as I said, receives roughly $8 billion every year. Right, so the telecom sector receives something around $6 billion every year. So I believe that in the past years, maybe we missed up some specific sectors, but I do believe that we did a very important and interesting job in another. So I would say that now what has changed is the willingness of the government to do in other sectors, and Rafael is here to prove it, right? So the Ministry of Transportation, as it used to be called, is now the Ministry of Infrastructure, and they are 100% dedicated to completely change the legal framework, for instance, the railways, new legal framework, and so on. So we are really dedicated to change dramatically the way we do business in Brazil, because historically we, apart from the telecom and the power sectors, we believed that the government had to play an important role on investing on infrastructure. And now it has changed completely. So I think that's the new mindset that we are now discussing, and also all the environmental concerns that we do have now. So if I might speak very briefly about the program that we are designing also for urban mobility, right? So we are right now discussing with the Congress a new bill that will be able to promote maybe 300 bidding processes within the next 15 years to electrify all the buses that we have in Brazil and to completely change the way we think about urban mobility, right? So this is embedded within our brains now, and we are very much dedicated to change the mindset that we used to have in the past years.
Thank you very much, Diogo. And the next question is addressed to Tatiane. Why are green bonds important, should be considered a financing alternative?
Thank you. So I think I would imagine this is potentially from an issuer perspective, but so green bonds basically the only difference that they have from traditional bonds is where the proceeds are going towards, right? So instead of whereas in a traditional bond, you don't have those proceeds allocated towards any specific categories or any specific project. In green bonds, you have the proceeds going towards 100% of eligible projects and assets. So in that sense, they have become really, really attractive to investors because of the transparency element that I mentioned earlier of knowing how those proceeds will be managed from a financial perspective, but also in knowing that these will go towards low carbon asset classes, more resilient asset classes, and this offers, especially in infrastructure portfolios, that offers a kind of a de-risking tool. So for the issuer, when you issue green bonds, it's like your product stands out, right? So it's a label that stands out, and it says something to investors about how those proceeds are being managed and what that is funding at the end of the day. So essentially, what you've got globally is a lot more investors that are looking for green than for vanilla bonds. So you have that just excess demand, increase in demand there, and what the reality of what we have at the moment is actually a scarcity of good green debt in the market, and we were able to see that during the pandemic with the very few issuances that have actually come to market were immensely oversubscribed, and actually even more so than what we usually see. So those are the differences, and those are the benefits on both sides.
Thank you very much, Tatiane. The first panel was great. I thank you very much. And moving on, I'm going to present Apex Brazil's services available for foreign investors in Brazil. I will give you a brief overview of what Apex Brazil can do to help you from the moment you start considering investing in Brazil through the beginning of operations in our country and all the way to the development of your company's presence in Brazil. But before that, I'd like to answer the most important question for every investor. Why invest in Brazil? First of all, because it's a continental country of 8,500 square kilometers that is very rich in natural resources. It has fertile soil and abundant water for agribusiness, many natural and energy resources, besides the largest biodiversity of the planet. Brazil has a big and diversified industrial park. The industry represents 20.9% of GDP, 70% of exports of assets and services, and 72% of private investments in research and development. Despite the pandemic, for the third consecutive month since May, Brazil's Industrial Confidence Index showed an upward trend. Expectations over the next 6 months have improved. Besides being a large consumer market with 210 million inhabitants, Brazil is also a platform for exports to other markets. The financial sector is highly sophisticated and allows strong access to debt instruments as well as domestic and foreign markets. The national legislation does not discriminate against foreign investments. Besides that, the federal government is fully committed to making the regulatory environment even more business-friendly. Brazil has the largest infrastructure portfolio in the world, with hundreds of projects in which you can invest with legal certainty, transparency, and predictability. There are ample openings for private investment in infrastructure, since the government has planned more auctions to be held in 2020. It's important to note that Brazil was the 6th global FDI destination in 2019. Moreover, according to the US consultancy firm A.T. Kearney, Brazil is among the 25 most reliable countries for foreign direct investment. And according to the Central Bank of Brazil, in the first half of 2020, the country received a total of $25.3 billion in FDI. The mission of Apex Brazil is to promote Brazilian exports, attract foreign investments, support Brazilian companies to expand internationally, provide market intelligence, provide export qualification, and promote Brazil as a global business partner. Apex has 5 regional offices in Brazil, 9 overseas offices, besides working in close coordination with 226 diplomatic missions abroad. Currently, Apex is supporting 14,000 companies, which are responsible for 30% of Brazilian exports. In the last 10 years, Apex supported more than 1,300 foreign companies and investment funds, which invested $26.6 billion in Brazil. Apex is the one-stop shop for foreign investors, which is linked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and works in partnership with the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Investment Partnerships Program to promote and facilitate investments in infrastructure. Investors are supported in establishing or expanding operations in Brazil. Investors have our help in starting a partnership with a Brazilian company and in finding new suppliers. Investors can commit capital in Brazil through funds and companies with our advice, and investors can count on Apex custom-made market intelligence for supporting strategic decisions. Apex also supports foreign investment funds seeking opportunities for venture capital and private equity allocation in Brazil, facilitating contact with Brazilian funds, companies, and startups. Apex supports investors in the identification of suitable locations, besides providing general information on potential costs, business environment, and talent pool availability. Using an extensive network, Apex Brazil also acts as liaison between foreign investors and regulatory and local authorities. We can arrange one-on-one meetings between investors and public and private local stakeholders. Besides organizing investments roundtables, Apex organizes business seminars like the one which happened in Miami in March this year. Since the very beginning of this pandemic, Apex has a hot site for supporting Brazilian companies and foreign investors, particularly providing updated and qualified information regarding all the measures introduced by the federal government to overcome the economic crisis. You will find more information on the Invest in Brazil LinkedIn profile and also on our new investment portal, investinbrazil.com.br. You can download the investment guide to Brazil with relevant and detailed information which will facilitate doing business in Brazil. To conclude, I'd like to note that the Brazilian infrastructure sector has been growing during this global economic downturn and investing in infrastructure is profitable despite the crisis. I'd also like to highlight that foreign investors have showed confidence in Brazil's economy in the long term, because we are a resilient country which overcame other crises and will succeed again. Finally, let me state that Apex Brazil stands ready to assist US companies willing to invest in Brazil, a country of millions of people and opportunities. If you want more information about our services, please contact us at infrastructure@apexbrazil.com.br. Thank you very much. Going ahead to the second panel, which will address the main Brazilian infrastructure projects, auctions, government strategies, and priorities, I'd like to invite the Special Secretary of PPI, Ms. Marta Cellier, the Director of Infrastructure Concessions and Public-Private Partnerships of the BNDES, Fábio Abrão, and the President, South America Strategic Business Unit at AES Corporation, Julian Nebreda. Moderation will be done by Victor Misuzaki, Head of Latin America Transportation and Capital Goods at Bradesco BBI. Mr. Victor, welcome, and the panel is yours.
Thank you, General Roberto Scotto, for the opportunity to moderate this panel. So to kickstart our second panel, I'd like to start with a question to Marta Cellier, Special Secretary of Investment Partnerships Program. Marta, the PPI is working on a robust pipeline of more than 150 infrastructure projects, which in our view has this huge potential to attract private investors. So how has PPI's work been developed in the face of the structuring projects in times of pandemic, the relationship with the Brazilian Court of Audit, and how the privatizations are advancing on the governmental agenda?
Hello, Vito. Thank you so much. Thank you, General Scotto, Julian, and Fabio here with us. I brought a presentation. Don't know if it's the moment or if I should just keep with the answers. How is it better? Can I share some slides with you?
Yes, it would be great.
Okay. So you all know how big and interesting Brazil is for foreign investments, in different infrastructure areas. So it is a big country, and that's why we're the 9th largest economy, but also very big in territory and population. And that makes us a very interesting consumer market with great opportunities for investments in transportation infrastructure, energy, and other sectors that I'll mention here. So PPI is a council of ministers that decide which infrastructures and which projects are a priority for Brazilian government to attract private investments to Brazil. So we have the Minister of Economy as the coordinator of the PPI Council, but many important ministers such as infrastructure, mines and energy, and environment participating on those decisions. We work as a hub to attract investments, to bring transparency, dialogue, and predictability to our portfolio. So a lot of coordination inside government, but also outside government with potential investors, with financial agencies, with the legislative branch, and I'll talk a bit about the reforms agenda, embassies all over the world, entities, audit entities, and licensing entities. So a lot of work to take all those projects out of paper and make them a reality. Brazil has chosen the path through economic reforms to develop and recover growth. So even before coronavirus, we were already dedicating a lot of attention to some important bills in Congress, such as the Social Security bill, the pension reform that has already been approved and was so important to reduce privileges and to recover the capability of the government to provide public services to population, Brazilian population. But we keep on going with a very important reforms agenda. Tax reform is being discussed right now, and we know how challenging it can be to invest in Brazil considering our tax system, so it is a priority for Brazilian government. Also, some important infrastructure reforms, and I show some of the bills we are discussing and how they can attract more investments to Brazil. Mainly private investments. So recently we have approved the new legal framework for Brazilian basic sanitation investments, opening doors for private investments in this sector that is so important and where we lack so much infrastructure for water distribution, sewage, even garbage collection. We are discussing right now in Congress important measures such as the new gas market to open also this market for more competition, bring more private investments. The privatization of Eletrobras, very important state-owned company in the energy sector in Brazil. Modernization of electric power sector, oil and gas also modernization of legislation, the law of concessions and PPPs, a railway authorization, environmental licensing, even a bill to discuss cabotage and open the market for national post. So see how diverse and how important is this agenda of reforms that is being discussed in Congress right now in Brazil, and that show our commitment to make Brazil a better environment for private investments. So last year was very successful for us. 36 auctions were carried out, and they'll bring to Brazil more than $90 billion investments and more than $80 billion concession fees and bonuses in different sectors. So we had 13 auctions in the ports sector, also a very important highway concession linking the state of Goiás to the state of Minas Gerais. Railway auction, and that was very important because there had been years that we didn't have an auction in this sector, and this is a very priority sector for federal government, railways. Also energy side with important energy generation auctions and also transmission lines. Airports, we had 12 assets that went for auction last year in 3 different blocks. Mining opportunity, oil and gas opportunity. So it was definitely a very rich year for the partnerships agenda in Brazil. And we keep forward with many projects. So 2020 has some challenges, additional challenges because of coronavirus, and it took a bit of our planning, mainly on-field analysis that we had to delay a bit. But we keep on going with many projects. We already had an important highway auction in Santa Catarina in February, the BR-101. This contract has already been signed with CCR and will bring more than $1 billion investments to this sector. Also, the renewal of Malha Paulista, an important railway in Brazil that was signed on May this year, and also will bring more than $1 billion investment to this important sector. And what is it that we're structuring right now? We have 157 projects being structured in PPI portfolio. So we work together with the ministries responsible for each of those assets, together with the federal agencies. So many people working on that right now, and see how diversified this portfolio is becoming. So we keep on going forward very strongly with transportation projects, energy projects, oil and gas, but also diversifying this portfolio with more privatization opportunities, so enterprises that are being sold, and other areas where we believe partnerships can bring many investments and better public services to populations, such as park administrations, forests, urban mobility opportunities, also the 5G auction, very important for Brazil, tourism opportunities, and we have literally dived into the agenda of partnerships with Brazilian states and municipalities. So federal government is helping with the feasibility studies, with funds, and all the analysis needed to make those partnerships a reality in many different sectors, such as basic sanitation, such as social infrastructure. So we're talking about daycares, hospitals, even prisons in Brazil that are counting on the help of federal government to get the structuring of all those projects. So in the next slides, I'll show quickly some of the projects we're structuring for the next months. So we have mining opportunities that are already being analyzed by our audit court, phosphate opportunity in Northeast Brazil, in Miriri, and also in Goiás, we have copper opportunities that we expect to have the auction this year. In oil and gas, we keep on going with the 17th round of concession that will happen next year. We still have 2 blocks from the transfer of rights of Petrobras that we're structuring together with the Petrol Agency in Brazil and the Minister of Mines and Energy, and that we expect to have the bids happening also in 2021. And we have the open acreage with opportunities that have came back to Brazilian portfolio that will happen probably at the end of the year as well. So in energy, next year we'll have important energy generation auctions. This year in December, we'll have a big transmission auction with almost 1.5 billion investments coming from this opportunity of investment in transmission lines in Brazil. Eletrobras is in our portfolio. We need to approve a bill that has been sent to Congress last year that is being discussed right now. The idea is to bring more shareholders, private shareholders to the company, so Brazilian government won't be anymore the controller of this company, and this will allow the company to get more investments done and participate in other also projects. It's been a while that Eletrobras hasn't been bidding and participating in more generation opportunities, transmission lines opportunity, so we believe that if the enterprise becomes private in the sense that we don't own the control anymore, we'll get back, we'll recover the capacity of making investments. Important auction also next year is the 5G technology. So preliminary analysis have already been submitted to some public consultation. The public consultation has been concluded in April this year, and the agency, Anatel, the telecommunication agency in Brazil, is right now reviewing the feasibility studies and the analysis and making some tests, on-field tests, to then submit all the studies to our audit court, the TCU, and we expect to have this auction happening first semester next year. In transportation, we have many important opportunities happening in Brazil right now. Those are PPPs, as for example, FIOL, an important railway in the state of Bahia that will bring more than 500-kilometer investments. Most of the works have already been done by a public company, so the private partner will have to finish those works and operate this important railway and also build the port in Ilhéus associated with this railway that will help mainly bring crops and iron from the interior of the state of Bahia to the port of Ilhéus. We also have Ferrogrão, a greenfield opportunity project that has its feasibility studies just finished by the government and sent to the audit court. We had recently also roadshow on Ferrogrão. We've talked to more than 22 enterprises, banks, and consultation companies that were interested in this project that will bring more than $5 billion investments to this sector. So in airports, we also have opportunities in 3 different blocks. We expect to have the auction happening next year in 2021. Those feasibility studies were concluded this year, not considering the coronavirus impacts on demand. So we are reviewing the demand forecasts to make sure we consider all the impacts of the health crisis. But we still believe those are very interesting assets, long-term contracts, 30 years. So even though we have a short-term crisis, we don't think it will affect the interest in those assets. Highway is also a big challenge in Brazil. We're structuring more than 18,000 kilometers of highways. Those are PPP opportunities. So the next tool we'll have this year are auctions in the BR-163, linking the state of Goiás to the state of Pará, and also the BR-153-080, linking the state of Goiás to the state of Tocantins. Those are 2 very important contracts that we expect to have the auction happening this year, but also many other contracts the next years to come. And in 2021, such as the Nova Dutra, very important highway linking the state of Rio to the state of Sao Paulo. Only the Nova Dutra, we expect to have almost $3 billion investments in only this highway with almost 600 kilometers. So I see the potential of this highway portfolio also in Brazil. Same thing for ports. We have many auctions happening this year and next year in public ports. So those are areas for the opportunity of investments from the private sector inside public administrated ports. But we are also structuring the concession of the whole port together with the Ministry of Infrastructure. We have this pilot that is the Port of Vitória in Espírito Santo, but also the Port of Santos, that is the largest port of Latin America. We expect to have the concession of the whole port happening in 2022. In August, end of August, we'll be in the B3 for an auction of 2 important terminals in Santos for cellulose, essentially. So this is an agenda that is moving very fast. So we have other opportunities just to show how we have diversified our portfolio and not working only with transportation and energy. We're expecting to bring a partner, private partner, to this project of integration of the São Francisco River. So important to bring water to 4 different states in Brazil and 390 cities. Many investments have already been done, most of them actually. So we have already spent $2.7 billion in this project, and we expect the private partner to operate this system, investing something around $115 million a year during a 35-year contract to make sure this integration of San Francisco works perfectly with all the operation needed to make it a reality. We also have been working a lot with the Minister of Developing in Brazil to make sure partnerships reach areas that were not so used to them. It's the case of the perimeter of irrigation in Irecê, Bahia, to show that we believe private sector can help us bring water and get more fruits and crops production all over Brazil, bringing development to different regions. So this is a project where federal government has already invested $275 million, and we expect more $160 million to come from this private partnership, public-private partnership. Well, Fabio will probably talk more about the basic sanitation projects, but they are a priority for federal government. We're helping the states and municipalities with our two important banks, the BNDES and Caixa Econômica Federal, structuring PPPs for water, sewage, and also for solid waste. So the two largest projects to come in the next months are the ones in Maceió, Alagoas, a PPP for water and sewage that will bring $500 million investment to the region. And we expect also to have the auction of Rio de Janeiro with more than $6 billion investments also in this contract. So this is an expectation of auctions that might happen still this year. So as I mentioned, 2 highways, some opportunities also in railways with the FIOL in Bahia, transmission lines, oil and gas. This is a very diversified portfolio that we keep moving forward, even though we had this coronavirus situation. But we believe this is the agenda that will help Brazil recover after the crisis. And in 2021, even more challenging agenda with 90 assets, many privatizations happening next year, we hope, and we keep forward with the basic sanitation, oil and gas, energy, and transportation agenda. So I'm sorry if I took too long, and thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Before we move to Fabio, just a simple question here. I mean, you mentioned about all these initiatives of the Congress in order to modernize the regulatory framework. And we can see also, I mean, when we take a look on the new concession agreements, I mean, the government also trying to modernize all these agreements. So can we say that now we're talking about, I mean, a huge effort from the government in order to open this market, I mean, the infrastructure to foreign investors and not keep it closed to only to local investors?
Perfect. That's exactly the goal. So we have a fiscal complicated situation in Brazil for government, not only federal government, but the state government, the municipalities. And we know how much it is important to invest in infrastructure to recover economic growth in Brazil, to make our products more challenging, to enhance our capacity of exports and production. So since we cannot count on public investments as much as we need, the private investments on infrastructure are the solution to make Brazil grow as much as we need. So we know that the new bill on basic sanitation allows us to expect more than $100 billion investments in contracts of water, sewage, solid waste. And that's huge, not only in terms of works that can be done, jobs that can be created, but also the impact on population, on health, on children's death, unfortunately many diseases that we still have in Brazil because of the lack of sanitation. Same thing in the gas sector. We know how our legislation makes it harder for investing in transportation infrastructure for gas, how we want to diversify the number of actors in this sector and not count only on Petrobras and a few players. So most of those bills that are being discussed in Congress are to open doors literally for private investments and foreign investments, and to make it easier for those investors to come to Brazil and understand that those contracts, they will be fully respected during the whole 30 years we'll have.
Thank you, Marta. Now I turn to Fabio Abreu, Director of Infrastructure, Concessions and PPPs at BNDES. So Fabio, Marta also talked about the sanitation sector, but BNDES has a kind of a key role in the structure of all these projects. So can you comment about the pipeline and the timing for the next auctions?
Hello, Victor, nice to meet you again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Julian, Marta, Scotto. Yes, what we've been doing in BNDES actually is to expand the concept of structuring infrastructure projects. And we started that new concept 1 year ago, more or less. As you call, it's a one-stop shop for the theme. We started creating a new division, which is based in Brasilia, in order to help to originate those projects. You must keep in mind that we understand that we have two types of clients. One of them is those that hold the opportunities, which in the case of BNDES are mainly the state and federal government. The other type of clients are the investors. So we need to keep both satisfied and happy with our work. So what we started doing is creating a new division based in Brazil, as I mentioned, in order to help in the first step, which is the origination. We understand that a good origination is halfway of a good structuring and a successful bid. After that, we improved our capacity of processing those opportunities. Today, we have in our portfolio something around $40 billion of capex in projects. Great majority of them is going to be bid the next 2 years. We're going to start this year with, as Martin mentioned, with the Alagoas sanitation project, and by the very end of the year with SEDAI. In the 2021, 2022, you're going to see the rest of those projects. So, as I mentioned, we start with the origination, then structuring. After that, we help the federal government and the states in the bidding process. And after that, if needed, the financial support. But what we really want is to bring other lenders to the Brazilian market, as well as to open the infrastructure market to private sector, including, of course, foreign investors, but mainly in a wide array of seeing the whole path of infrastructure in Brazil to open it to the private sector in general. So this is our role in general. And yes, the portfolio is very diversified. We have mainly logistics infrastructure projects. I could say that part of it's the road systems. Let's take in consideration that Brazil has something around 22,000 kilometers of toll roads. In our portfolio, we are structuring something around 16,000, 17,000. So it's a massive road system that we are structuring. After that, we have the ports, including Santos Port, which is the biggest port in the southern hemisphere, but also other ports such as Espírito Santo complex, and sanitation and other infrastructure. So the whole bulk of it sum up something, as I mentioned, around $40 billion. The great part of it going to be auctioned the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. And my second question here, I mean, you mentioned briefly about financing and BNDES. I mean, when we think about infrastructure, BNDES is also a very important supporter. So what BNDES, I mean, given all these news about, I mean, BNDES also trying to rescue other sectors of the economy because of the pandemic, can you say that BNDES will also, I mean, maintain the support for the infrastructure sector, given all these, I mean, numbers of projects that will be auctioned in the coming quarters?
Excellent question, Victor. What we've done in terms of I would say it's not rescuing the sectors, but actually being an alternative to finance for those sectors. But what we've done was actually to bring the private market to those operations, which means that we haven't done any of those major operations by ourselves. We always brought other banks, Brazilian banks, international banks, of course with sometimes different role. And that was a strategy we decided to follow one of the reasons is that to preserve our balance sheet to this function of developing infrastructure. So we are okay. We have the financial capacity to help all those projects if needed. But what we really want is to bring other lenders too. So as I mentioned, the last step of this whole structuring process is the lending or the financial conditions that bring financial ability to those projects, which means not just that we have the interface with the equity part of the investment, but also the lending part, which means that we have conversations with other banks or for other multilateral institutions to bring them to the Brazilian market and be part of the lending process jointly with BNDES. So our philosophy is to open the market, not just in the equity part of it, but of course in the lending part of it. And we are okay in terms of financial, especially because the decision we took in order to bring the other players in those process of being an alternative in those companies that were hit severely by the COVID crisis.
Okay, and Fabio, just a last one here. I mean, if you think about interest rates, right? I mean, we're talking about an environment of a very low interest rate. In some cases, we're talking about negative interest rates, and we have all these opportunities in Brazil. Can you also comment about returns? I mean, what would make sense to expect, or when you are structuring a new concession, what kind of return you are talking about?
For sure. The point of view is actually not just the return. Return are, let's say, aligned with the risk, but mainly to de-risk the assets. So that's our major role, I would say. And that's why we invested so much in the origination process. So just to give an example for sanitation, of course, BNDES is pretty much involved in all the discussions during the design of the bill. But remember that some of those projects we are structuring actually began before even the start of the whole discussion concerning the sector. So what we've done actually is to put inside the contracts lots of those improvements that today we see in the bill. So our major role, as I mentioned, was to de-risk those assets and to combine those assets in order to be attractive to the private sector. After de-risking that in terms of this structuring those bids and those opportunities, of course, we design a compatible return. And what we see actually is, we notice that the private sector, especially the international investor, quite well interested in those opportunities. We started doing the non-zero roadshow first by the end of the last year, and we continue doing that. All the discussions and the presenting the projects and explaining the doubts and hearing also the point of view of those investors in order to improve the structure itself. And what you see now is that we understand that we are going to see very healthy competition and the first ones, but we believe that's going to keep for the next for the whole array of the opportunities that we are structuring. So first, de-risking, well structuring, well origination, aligned to the improvements in the regulatory framework, and then of course creating some triggers to keep the investment also attractive in terms of returns. So that's what we are doing. Of course, having a significant portfolio is important because that materializes what we are saying. But our major goal here is actually to open the infrastructure market, the Brazilian infrastructure market, faster, clearer than we saw the last years. But we understand that it's totally feasible. Actually, we are right now seeing that, and we're going to see the intensity of that increase in the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. So to conclude this panel, I will turn to Julian Nebreda, President of AES Corporation for South America region. Julian, so after all these presentations from the PPI and BNDES, I mean, when we take a look on AES Corporation, you have a very deep expertise in the Brazilian infrastructure sector and especially in the power sector. So what's your view about this infrastructure program? Is there, let's say, anything missing that could make these projects even more compelling?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Yes, thank you for the invitation, and Victor, Marta, and Fabio. Great honor to be here sharing this virtual panel with you. You know, I can talk from the private sector view, but mostly from the energy sector, so from the electricity sector, the power sector. So it will be probably a little bit. I think that I want to, you know, maybe make 2 points that are, when we make investments, you know, not only in Brazil generally, one of the things that we spend a lot of time looking at, and a significant amount of time, is looking at the institutions of the market. No, how does the market work? Where, you know, courts work well, where the government is, you know, strong, where the Congress works well. And so that's a first element, no? And I think that one is one where we have seen huge improvements in Brazil over, you know, since democracy came back in the 80s. You know, the judicial system is very independent. The regulatory system has become very independent, very solid, not subject to political corruption, and we are not subject to political influence. So, you know, I think that's a very good one, and something that probably, you know, you all take for granted, you know, in Brazil because of, you know, the country. But, you know, when you are investing globally, it's not like that everywhere. So that's one point that I would like to highlight. The second point that I would like to highlight is that in the case of Brazil, an important driver for us is, you know, and this goes to Fabio's point, that infrastructure projects need to be designed in a way where the private sector can do what it does best, which is price the project, take the enterprise risk of the project. And the government does what it does best, which is, you know, plan for what is needed and has a global view of the market and can take out non-enterprise risk of the project, not de-risk the project from that point of view. You know, we take the project of the, you know, building it on time, building it right, managing properly, investing in the right technology, ensuring that, you know, we do that part right. But we're very bad at managing the other risks, the risks that are not related to the enterprise, which are related to more global in the understanding, more judicial parts, more, you know, sanctity of contracts. And I think that has been a success in the case of Brazil, especially in the power sector, and both generally in the electricity sector, I would say. You know, both power and transmission distribution have been a little bit different. We can talk a little about it, but it's a different story. Is that where, you know, we take, you know, the system has been designed for the enterprises, for the private companies, to take the enterprise risks. And the risks which are not enterprise, which are systemic or are connected to other elements of the venture, are somehow, you know, out. And that gives you the best economic solution. You pay the best price for it. You know, the government takes it, or the consumer, which is at the end of the day represents the Brazilian, takes the best price for the asset, and at the same time, because they know that if you were to give this risk to the private sector is not very good at pricing them. It's not very good. It doesn't price them well. So, you know, I think that's a second element that we take, you know, is very, very important. And the third element, which is something that was discussed here, relates to respect for contracts, which we have seen, you know, I think the power sector is one that is a model in that point of view. We still have some issues. It's not perfect, clearly. We can talk a little about what they are, but, you know, generally we have seen a respect for contracts. Contracts are respected, both by the regulatory system, governed by the judicial system. So you do see when you are investing, you know you are entering into a contract that's going to be respected in a similar way. When you know, entities have diverted from respecting the contract or managed somehow, try to manage the regulatory system, it usually has gone has given us back results. The GSF, the famous GSF for the power sector. This concept of we manage the hydrology in Brazil as a community, as a group, and when it was used, that community or that resource to finance projects or to do things that were different than managing hydro risk. We're still 10 years after still debating it, and there's $8-10 billion reais of money floating around that hasn't been able to use for the economy because of mismanagement. So I think the respect for contracts is very, very important. And the fourth, if I can finish with one, is that I think, and this goes to Fabio and to Marta, and it's very, very important, the leadership of the government. There's no way to do infrastructure projects. No way. There's no way of doing infrastructure in a market where the government does not take this as a priority. If you want the private sector to be part of it, the government needs to make this as an agenda, like you're doing in Brazil with the PPI and with BNDES, changing the way they're thinking about it. And I think that makes a huge difference. That's going to make a huge difference. The government is committed to ensuring that, that the infrastructure can be developed, that the private sector can participate, that you can bring as much economic efficiency as you can for this project. So I would say that's the fourth one. And then, we're very optimistic about the future of the present and the future of the Brazilian economy. We're going through a difficult time, clearly. We're all suffering this pandemic and all the problems that it will create, and it will take time to resolve this issue, no problem. But there's no doubt that with strong institutions, respect for contracts, and the leadership of the government and the government institutions in providing the environment for infrastructure development, we will have the infrastructure. And I think the infrastructure sector is going to be a strong source of economic for the economic recovery of the country. It's going to strong stride. It creates a lot of value in the economy, and most of the dollars are bought and put into the floor. They convert into cement, into power plants, into wind turbines, into transmission lines, things that are real assets that are used and create economic efficiency into the market. So we're very positive on that.
Okay, thank you. And before we open for questions from the audience, private investors are giving more and more attention or importance to ESG. So how are the imperatives of social and environmental sustainability being observed by investors to invest in infrastructure in Brazil?
Very good, great question, Victor. And this goes to the heart of what we try to do. I mean, ESG at the end of the day, and the lady that talked about green bonds made that point, it's about resilience. That's what it is. It's not about, some people say, well, you have to be a believer. No, it's about resilience. It's your ability to manage crisis, your ability to manage problems. That, like compliance was 10 years ago, hey, you need to do this. This is something that ESG is fundamental to be a resilient company. Brazil is a little late to this discussion, a little bit. And I'll say, even though it's a huge market, and when you looked at it from, we invest globally. And this is probably, and I talk to investors in most of the markets in South America and globally. And this is the first thing when you talk to global investors, the first thing they talk to you. Because it's about resilience. Hey, how's your governance issues? How are your social issues? How are you managing this? How are you managing your environmental risk? When you talk to Brazil, it's less. It doesn't come as often. It's coming more and more you see it, but it's less. But it's coming. I mean, this is my point, and this is my advice to everybody. Because it's not, it is about risk management. So it is something that is coming, and it's going to become an even stronger team in the way we're going to talk about infrastructure projects. Recently, we announced a big investment in Brazil that we bought the BNDES stake in Tietê, part of BNDES stake in Tietê. And, when we talked about it, we talked to the international, and there was a moment when, if you follow the international press, the New York Times had the awful articles about Brazil and the pandemic and the rainforest and, all that stuff. And, we were concerned that it might create some problems, that some investors were going to see it. And we went out and talked to people. you know what resonated with people? The ESG story, the fact that it was, we have a very strong, still we need a lot more to do, but a strong ESG story in Brazil. And, that resonated with people, that, the investors who are concerned about this other stuff were really, impressed by, you are really on top of your environmental concerns, your social elements, your governance issues, and we still have an even more, now after this, we're going to go enter into a more ambitious agenda. So I think this is fundamental. You cannot have a successful project today, attract foreign investors, ensure that you are going to be able to, the returns you expect to collect, that you are actually going to be able to get, that you're actually going to be able to monetize and capture them, if you don't have a strong ESG story. And I think that in Brazil, as I said, it's something that's starting. It's a little bit later than the rest, but I have no doubt that this is something that's going to be very, very much on top of all these PPI projects, all these projects that you have, all these lists, and it's something that we need to work. And I think the success companies, and this is where we would like to be, clearly are the companies that can do this fast, that can do this efficiently, that can do this, where ESG does not become an element that delays your project, but actually makes it faster, makes it more efficient, makes it work better, makes it create the value it creates to the society and to you and your investors better. So, I think that it's a great, thank you very, very much for that question. We believe, and we've been seeing, clear proof that ESG is a fundamental part of what we want to do and what we believe is going to be the success of Brazil going forward.
Okay, thank you, Julian. And thank you, Marta, Fabio, and Julian for this panel. Now I'll hand over to General Roberto Scotto for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. We have two questions. The first one is to Marta, and the other is to Julian. Marta, among the projects prioritized by the Brazilian government, which ones do you believe are in conformity with the nature of American investors?
Oh, that's a good question. We just mentioned here the ESG aspects of the Brazilian opportunities and how important the ESG agenda is to American investors. So they're looking for projects that are sustainable, that have great impact on society, and we have all this in the PPI portfolio. So when we look at the basic sanitation opportunities, we see how much they can impact positively the environment in Brazil with less pollution, health issues, and the great impact of those projects. When we look at energy projects, and Julian was talking about it, we have such a green energy matrix in Brazil. It's even hard to compare it to other countries because we have invested a lot, and we are investing even more in hydropower plants, sun energy, energy coming from the wind, and each time more those plants and those investments are happening in Brazil, and we have few plants that still count on fossil fuel in Brazil that we can call as responsible for pollution. So very green portfolio of energy opportunities in Brazil. When we look at railways, for example, and how they substitute the roads and all the pollution we have from the roads and the accidents we have from the Brazilian roads and the time for the transportation and how much it costs for Brazilian production and exports, we really believe also the railway sector is very strategic. So I hope we can get more investor Americans in all those projects and opportunities in Brazil.
Okay, Marta, thank you. The second question is to Julian. In your opinion, how is Brazil more open to the private sector than years ago? Are the projections positive regarding Brazil's framework despite the COVID-19 situation?
Very good question. I think that, as I said, I commend really the government of Brazil for the huge effort in opening the market, not only for American companies, globally for companies. I think that, and I think I can raise issues, but I think or elements that really bring this up. First, the commitment to an open regulatory process, and open and strong. We have seen it in the energy sector for many years, but now we're seeing it in water, we're seeing it in other places, and gas, and so very good. Second, having the government leave space in the private for the private sector to develop these enterprise elements that I mentioned about. And we talked about the privatization of Electrobras, changing the role of BNDES from being the main investor, the main creditor, or the main financier of these projects into playing a role more of promoter and trying to bring the private sector to be more of a financier. All those things give you a lot more confidence in the Brazilian sector. So I really see many years of progress, but really, the commitment that we have seen in the last couple of years of, the agenda of the government, the effort of opening sectors, the commitment to strong and regulatory, open and transparent regulatory process. And third, rethinking the role of the state, rethinking the role of the state, letting the state leave the enterprise part of it, where the private sector has an important role, and have the state take part of the common good, or things that affect all of us. So, I'm an optimist on Brazil. I do think that, I can mention this pandemic has created some of this bad news somehow in the international press, that we are, as a company, conveying, talking and explaining to people that this does not really reflect the great effort of the people and the government and of Brazil and the institutions in Brazil to create a better future for its people. So, I really, I'm glad that for this invitation and the ability to communicate this message to all the American or international investors that are here in this participating in the web seminar. And I'll tell you, Brazil is open for business, so let's do it.
Now I'd like to thank Marta, Fabio, Julian for being with us, and Victor for leading this great panel. Before the end of this event, I would like to emphasize once more that Apex Brazil, in partnership with several institutions, plan a series of initiatives with focus on showing good opportunities for investments in infrastructure. The next event will be held on September 15th and will address the new regulatory framework for sanitation and the main opportunities of the sector. More information may be obtained soon on the Apex Brazil website, on our Invest in Brazil LinkedIn profile, and on the other social networks. I'd like to thank all of you who watched us today and will invest in Brazil, a country of millions of people and opportunities. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Marcelo Guaranis, Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Economy, for his closing remarks. Welcome, Marcelo.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to, good morning to you all, good morning to people in the US, and good afternoon to people in Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here to address some close remarks to this fruitful morning. From what I can see, we could have some words from MCHEM, from IDB, from the organization of the CEO Forum, and obviously from Apex. They are all partners of Brazil trying to improve our business environment and to attract investments to Brazil. Well, as you all can see, since the beginning of 2019, we have a major change in our economy. President Bolsonaro took place understanding the importance of having a huge economic reform in Brazil. Because of that, he needs to have a good structure to do so, and this is the Minister of Economy. That's a merger of 4 different ministers. It formed in a way that we could manage all the reforms that this country can do. What President Bolsonaro thought, in his diagnosis, is that Brazilian economy needs to have a lot of change. We expend public money a lot without seeing good results to our population and need to change that. We cause a lot of difficulties to the private sector to invest. We don't have a good business environment. We didn't have a good business environment and had to change that. So President Bolsonaro understood the importance of having a lot of different reforms at the same time. And he has to be managed in a way that people understand how important this is to attract investments to Brazil. Well, the group of reforms are based in two different themes. The first one is to change the public expenditures. How can we improve public expenditures in Brazil? That's why the social security reform was the most important. So we could reduce the expenditure in social security in Brazil that's getting higher and higher every year. And with that, we could have more space to do things to the people, things that people really need to change our public policies. The second important reform is the administrative reform, together with the fiscal reform. How can we change the way that the government spend money, bringing more benefits to the people, to the Brazilian people? In the side of the private sector, in the side of business environment, it was very important to reduce the burden of government regulation. Brazil is in the last place of burden of government regulation. When you see the competitiveness global index from the World Economic Forum, we are in the last place. We have to change that. We have to make regulation better. We have to improve the business environment so people can bring investments to Brazil and can receive money from that. And Brazilians can invest, and Brazilians can produce. So to reform the business environment is also very important. In a way to do so, tax reform was always in our track. So to start the tax reform, to change the tax system in Brazil, and also to reduce the burden of regulation. All these different reforms were started last year, from the beginning of 2019. And we were very successful in achieving a huge social security reform in the end of the year. It was the biggest reform of all times in Brazil, giving us some economy that can change the history in the next years. It was very, very important. In the beginning of this year, as all the world is suffering, we had the COVID. It changed a little bit our strategy. We were a reform machine, and we have to change this to take care of the people, to take care of the population, to take care of the health of the people, so we could reduce the impacts of all this disease in our country. So the Minister of Economy changed from a machine of doing reforms to a machine of preparing social and emergency measures to take care of the population. In 1 month, we were able to do a lot of different public policies, new public policies. In the last panel, we were seeing the former presenter was just explaining a little bit of the importance of all the package of public policy that we established. And it was very important to reduce the impact of the COVID in our population. We focus our efforts in 3 different aspects. The first one is how can we aid the most vulnerable people. We have a lot of people that we could not see. It was an invisible economy, an informal economy, and we need to protect these people from all the impact of the economic effects of the COVID. The second package is how can we try to keep people on their jobs? How can we deal with the maintenance of jobs? How can we give companies the opportunity to keep their people employed? So when we start with the recovery of the economy, people can really restart to work in a quick way, and we can make a recovery quicker. So this was a big and ambitious package. The social aid, the emergency social aid that we were able to give to the poorest people, to the people in the informal economy. It was a very successful program in a public policy. We are able to pay for more than 50 million people in 1 month. It was really impressive. In terms of maintenance of jobs, all the different packages that we made was the flexibility of the contracts of hiring people, and also a complementary salary that government's paying for everybody that's in the moment of more flexibility. We are able to reduce the unemployment in more than 10 million. We know that we saved 10 million jobs, at least so far. So it was fantastic from our side to see the results of that and to see at least the population of Brazil can suffer less with all the impact of COVID. And the third group of measures is to battle the fight against the COVID, to give more money to the federal government, to give more money to states and municipalities so they can fight against all the impact of that. During the last month, we spent a lot of money. We are a government that want to change that, want to change the way we spend public money, but that was the moment that we had to expend more. People need more resource, people need new policies. It was very important to do that. But all this emergency cannot change the trajectory that we had in doing reforms. The plan that President Bolsonaro had before the crisis is the plan that he will have after the crisis. We have to keep going with the reforms. We have to be back on track. So our recovery plan is based in all the reforms that we started last year. But now we will have more priorities. We have to leave the situation as quickly as possible. So we start with the tax reform. I think that tax reform is the most important reform for the business environment. The tax system in Brazil is a mess, and we have to change that. We have to make it simpler. We have to make it more friendly for people to invest. Even for us Brazilians, it's not so easy. So that is the most important objective of our tax reform, to have a simple tax system and to bring people to invest in Brazil, to make it easier to invest in Brazil. Together with the tax reform, and also because of the crisis, we understand we have to change the labor system in Brazil. We have to make people be employed quickly. We have to make people have more opportunities than they have today. So together with the tax reform, the labor reform will be sent to the Congress in a different way. So companies will be able to hire people faster, and we can reduce the number of unemployment. Another thing that was very clear for us is that we have to increase the social protection network. So together with the tax reform and this change in the labor system, we will discuss with the Congress a big package of social protection that's called Renda Brasil. It's very important to protect the most vulnerable. Well, as I said, COVID really had a big impact in Brazil, but we won't change our strategy. We will be back on track in our reforms, and we expect to send a lot of things to the Congress in the next week. The first step of the tax reform was already sent, and now we are just discussing the next steps, start this conversation with the Congress. To improve the business environment, to have a simple tax system, to reduce the burden of regulation. This is all that we are trying to do to attract more investments. US is one of the greatest partners that we have, is the greatest strategic partner that we have so far, and we intend to forge even closer with them. I just have a wonderful meeting with the new ambassador that US has in Brazil, the Todd Chapman. It's a fantastic guy that really understands everything that we are doing here and understand everything that we have to do. And I just asked him to help us to talk with the Congress of the importance of all this change and all these reforms. It's very important the private sector help us to improve the business environment in Brazil. The CEO Forum was very helpful in the past in order to, and MCHAM as well, they were very helpful in order to increase the level of cooperation with the OECD and the support of the US government to our candidature to OECD. It's very important to keep in this strategy together. To have a better place to invest is good for US companies, is good for Brazilians, is good for everybody. Our challenge is to make Brazil even a better place to invest. No, we need help. We need the help of everybody that we're discussing during this morning. And we're very, very hopeful of having a better place to live in the next years. Thank you very much for the words. Thank you. I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you very much for your time.